morning. My name's Steve Maher. I'm with Risk Management Professionals, and welcome to our continuing series on best practices of HAZOP and LOPA applications. As most of you know, we're a PSM and RMP consultancy. This is something where we try to adhere to best practices and provide insights and tips to the general PSM and RMP folks out there who need this to do their job and do it well. Next, please. All right, just a little bit about what we're doing this morning. We are using a GoToWebinar medium. So what that means is it does provide the example for you to join in later during the question and answer session and unmute your microphone. Right now, everybody's microphones are on mute, so that if you are going about your daily activities, you can answer phones, you can type all you want to on your keyboard, and it's not going to impact the rest of the folks' ability to hear the webinar. As part of that interface, you have a chat window that provides you with an ability to contact our producer, Kevin Singh. If you have technical problems, also call that number that you saw on the screen a few minutes ago, 877-532-0806. Whether you want to chat with Kevin or whether you want to call in, somebody will help you. The windows that you're seeing on your screen, you should be seeing as a default an image of the of the speaker on the left. That's me, Steve Maher. And that can be sized bigger or smaller as you see fit. It can also be moved around to make it comfortable for you to view. So that's basically how things are working. We're going to be focusing on lessons learned and tips for the facilitation of high-quality HAZOP and LOPA studies. But let me give you a little appreciation for how this fits into the big picture first. Next. We've been addressing several key topics as part of our HAZOP and LOPA facilitation series. As you can see, we've gone through a lot of the basics in the past. All these, for those of you who haven't attended all of our sessions, are available as recordings. Next, please. We've gone through all the basics. We've covered a lot of the quantitative techniques, common cause interactions, and how to handle a lot of the important things that can trip people up during HAZOP and LOPA studies. Next. And next. One of the most recent things that have come about are requirements for safeguard protection analysis. So you've noticed that over time, a lot of our emphasis has shifted more towards layer of protection analysis because that's an issue that a lot of people are going to have to deal with. Next. So today we're going to focus on lessons learned and tips for the facilitation of high-quality HAZOP and LOPA studies. We're going to be building on a lot of the techniques and issues that we've discussed in the past. And a lot of the focus is going to be on facilities under design. To the extent practical, I'm going to provide several concrete tips that you can use and work into your projects, whether they be in the design phase or whether they be something for an operating facility. And Kevin, can you shift over to the other presentation, please? Okay, excellent. So a lot of you folks have either participated in HAZOP or LOPA studies or perhaps facilitated some. I've had the privilege of being involved in some very large capital projects that have really pushed the limits on HAZOP and LOPA. And my interest today is to share some of those experiences with you. These experiences have really brought about and made good use of a lot of the technical decision making, problem solving, and project management abilities that are ancillary to the application of HAZOP and LOPA studies. These are things that we've put together in papers. There's a paper from the 2012 Global Congress on Process Safety that's available for download. And a lot of the core elements of this particular presentation were presented at the 2015 Global Congress on Process Safety. So these are available for download. There's lots of resources on our website. We try to keep up with all the regulatory developments and things that are happening. We have a regulatory reference page. And we also have a variety of technical resource pages with webinars and publications, etc. So before we get too much into it, just a little bit about your speaker. That's me, Steve Maher. I've been around the block a few times. I've got a couple of degrees, a couple of professional engineering certifications, as well as being a certified safety professional. I've had the real privilege to be involved in some really cutting-edge activities over the years. In the mid-'80s, as Tom Carmody was rolling out the Center for Chemical Process Safety, I served for a couple of years in the technical steering committee, and I've also been involved in some landmark projects that are really kind of were paradigm shifts. The first one, the Platform Safety Shutdown System Effectiveness Study, we're looking at paradigm shifts in terms of control systems going from analog to digital back in the 80s, and then infusing that into quantitative risk assessment and also the early rollouts of HAZOP studies too. So I've had a lot of really interesting experiences, and I'm anxious to share those with you. A lot of these are available in publication form that you can also download. For our previous HAZOP facilitation series, we've covered a lot of topics. I've made a short list here. Again, these are available for download. You can look at the recordings. We do try to cover a lot of things that not only the basics, but a lot of the things that can trip people up, common cause failure analysis, infusion of quantitative techniques, safety instrumented systems, safety integrity levels. How do you deal with that? How do you define allocation targets? Using layer protection analysis to enhance what you're doing for the HAZOP approach. And also, how do you apply HAZOP during the design phase? We coined a term a couple of years ago called a de-HAZOP. Basically, it's a slightly different animal because you've got a more stringent set of objectives to meet during the design phase. Obviously, the regulatory environment is changing. You've seen, if you've been at some of our regional workshops, you've seen how there's a lot of changes right now going on at the federal level with the Environmental Protection Agency and risk management programs, and also in the state of California. A lot of things are happening right now with respect to what they call the Cal-ARPA program here, or the California Accidental Release Prevention Program, and of course that dovetails with process safety management as it's rolled out by Cal-OSHA. So a lot of these things, all these regulatory changes, all these technical challenges, all that makes an impact on what you do. That's the basic main purpose of our facilitation series, is to try to provide best practices. How do you solve these kind of problems? Our focus today is really going to be broken into several parts. I want you to walk away with the understanding of the challenges during the design phase. How do you apply HAZOP effectively? Call it a de-HAZOP. You'll see that term a lot during the presentation. Layer protection analysis. If it's done properly, it can enhance what you're doing, not necessarily bog you down, although a lot of people might disagree with me on some of these issues. If it's applied properly, it can really help you solve problems and provide a lot of insights. So not only understanding on some of the challenges, I'd like you to walk away with some effective tips, things that can solve some of the challenges on your plate right now. So to do that, I want to give a little bit of background on what's going on there during the design phase. How do you handle typical challenges? Vendor packages. The design world has changed a lot in the past couple of decades. People are segmenting their designs significantly and reliant on vendors to build various portions of their units. That brings on a whole new set of problems that we'll talk about. General application tips, and what do you do about action items? A lot of times during the design phase, you have too many action items. I'll go over the reasons for that and how do you handle that, and of course quality issues, and then how do you infuse this in the overall project management framework. And also on that screen and on the slides that were passed out are links to where you can find our publications. So let's talk about first why you want to apply HAZOP and LOPA during the design phase in the first place. Focus is decision making and technical problem solving. This is some collage of things that have happened. Most of the people who are attending this webinar have responsibilities for facilities that deal with highly hazardous materials. The trick, a lot of people apply HAZOP and LOPA for operating facilities. However, there's a whole world of opportunity out there to apply these techniques during the design phase, where you can more effectively and more cost effectively solve problems, make changes while it's on the drawing board to get rid of to at least minimize the number of vulnerabilities that might be inherent in the design, making it easier to operate safely. All these things are great opportunities during the design phase. And again, my focus right now is to try to provide some tips and how do you infuse that properly. But first, let's take a quick look at the design cycle. All right, basically it's pretty simple. You go ahead and you partition the design, whether it's in-house personnel, if you're doing an open arts facility, or vendor packages. You do your design work, pull it together, then most of the designs nowadays are doing some form of safety assessment. Let's say you're doing a design HAZOP or LOPA. Okay, you do that, you find nothing's ever 100% wonderful the first time. So you find some vulnerabilities or some weaknesses, patch them up, throw it back in the design process, tweak the design, then you cycle it again. This is part of the design process. If you at least include the HAZOP and LOPA, that's something that you're being proactive and you're trying to work out weaknesses in safety and operability ahead of time. So that's what's going on during the design process. But doing it properly, it's all about resources. So what kind of resources are used during the design? Well, during design formulation and design review, somebody's got to lead the team, pull it together, do the big picture. There's leadership that's necessary. Process engineering is necessary for most designs that we get involved in. Control and protection systems folks, health and safety professionals, and also operations. All those are key players in terms of formulating a design. When you're doing a design HAZOP or LOPA, you're also going to bring in package vendor representation, rotating equipment specialists, and other specialists. So when you look at that, there's a high degree of overlap. So a lot of it's all about the resources. How do you make effective use of the resources when you've got the same kind of resources available for the design formulation and design review, and also for the HAZOP and LOPA phase? So using those resources provide a much greater potential to extract information and really enhance what you're doing during the design. So let's talk about your objectives and how do you achieve that. Well, how do you identify weaknesses? Old school way was experience and guesswork. Well, if you actually make scenarios of what can go wrong and then try to identify how likely they are or how bad they can be as part of a scenario-based analysis, then it helps you help you prioritize where your weaknesses might be and really focus on them. So it's all about a scenario-based assessment when you're looking at things that can go wrong with a system. So the whole concept of likelihood and severity to get an appreciation for where you need to focus your design efforts is very important. So this is the overall overreaching technique of HAZOP, LOPA, and all the other techniques that are applied during the design process. So those techniques are very helpful for decision making and problem solving. You've got the resources. You've basically got an overall design approach. So the idea is, how do you pull those together? Well, realistically, given the fundamental importance of process hazard analysis to safety and operability, the question is basically, should it play a role during the design process? But how could you do a design process effectively without infusing these kind of concepts? You've got the resources, you've got the techniques, you've got an approach for the design. So the concept of bringing those into play during the design is of paramount importance. This is an approach that can also help in problem solving and helping your design focus on some of the core issues. So the challenge is getting as much value as possible from the application of HAZOP and also LOPA. Now, the other question is when. Well, if you wait till the end, you have limited options. The curve on the screen is representative of the value that you get from applying a HAZOP or LOPA. Well, some of the techniques you can apply early on but aren't very good later. Inherent safer design concepts, HAZOPs, those are very useful towards the beginning. Towards the end, people apply HAZOP, what-if checklists, job safety analysis. The HAZOP and LOPA is something that you can apply during the entire phase of the project, and it provides the most value towards the center part, where you can make changes effectively without having to do a lot of retrofits, or if it's operating, going through and making a lot of changes to your design or taking it out of service. So the concept of bringing this in early during the design phase is really the right time when you want to apply a HAZOP and LOPA. So let's talk about some of the potential challenges. It's also important to understand the need for this, and also to have a framework for convincing management that it's appropriate to infuse into your design process. The idea of using it for technical solutions and decision making means that you can provide a lot of value by putting your design process early. But what are the general challenges that you've got? A lot of the information as the design is going on is not necessarily complete. There may be some maturity issues with respect to the design information, how accurate it is, and also it's changing all the time. You've also got the very busy people who are busy doing a lot of the details of the design, and they may be in various geographic locations. So in all cases, it's very critical to make exceptionally good use of people's time. And you've also got another challenge in that you've got management pressure typically to move the design process ahead and to avoid changes because of the potential impact on schedule and finances. In terms of addressing these kind of challenges in general, and I'll get into a lot more details in a few minutes, basically the idea of applying HAZOP and LOPA early in the design process is you can prioritize conclusions needed for critical design issues. Focus your efforts on where it's important and where it makes the most sense. Focus your energies, focus the finances, and the tuning you need to do on the design to where it's important. Prioritizing high-risk scenarios can help you do that. Why spend a lot of money or effort on things that don't really contribute significantly to safety or to the operability of the facility? Applying HAZOP and LOPA during the design process enables you to do that. You can also correct problems during the HAZOP study. You've got the same resources as we discussed a few minutes ago that are being used for design reviews and also the design process. Well, if things come up during the HAZOP study and they're very simple corrections, you can fix them on the spot and not have to go through more design cycles or wait till the end of your design when you've got a much greater expense needed for corrections. You can, if you've got master engineering drawings, the opportunity exists to maybe make changes on the spot. Also, if you're bringing in LOPA, there's a bit of controversy on whether you do LOPA during the actual HAZOP session or afterwards. If you're doing it during the HAZOP session, it can really streamline any changes that must be made to the HAZOP or to the design by understanding more what the potential weaknesses are in the system. It can improve the quality of what you're doing, and it can really enhance the team's understanding of the potential accident scenarios. And also, we'll be talking about pre-work for the design HAZOP in a few minutes. Other challenges that exist, and I kind of alluded to this a few minutes ago, is that it's usually considered to be a tug-of-war between the engineering team and also the management team. Management for a project wants to move it forward, minimize cost, maintain schedule, get the job done. Engineers want to optimize the design. The concept of bringing in a HAZOP and also layer protection analysis during the design phase helps resolve some of those conflicts. It enables you to move forward, keep the project moving, and also enables the engineers to do their job in terms of fine-tuning, optimizing, making sure the thing works when it's turned over. So the HAZOP and LOPA can be a yin-yang that pulls it all together. So let's talk about vendor packages before we get into a lot of the very specific tips. Why are vendor packages a challenge? As I mentioned before, designs are being done differently than they were a couple of decades ago. A couple of decades ago, you'd hire a design firm. They'd handle all the details and make sure everything works together. The people who are pulling the design together, they may be a few offices away or maybe on the next floor. Now you've got a situation where people are trying to maintain project schedules, minimize costs, and they do that by partitioning out pieces of the unit to specialists, basically to making a lot more vendor packages. So the real challenge is how do you integrate those vendor packages and make sure that your design has minimal weaknesses in it. Well, the vendor is responsible for timely delivery, well thought out design, and correct and complete design information. Now, some of you in the audience may be chuckling a bit because for those of you who have worked on large projects that make extensive use of vendors, this is never 100%. There's always challenges with respect to delivery timing. Is the design complete, and is it applicable for your project, and does it mesh with the entire system? And getting correct and complete design information can also be quite a challenge. Part of that's inherent in the concept of using vendor packages. The specs can change from the integrator over to the vendor because of other changes in the process design. Also, the package is often delivered late in the project. It's being worked on in parallel with a lot of the other elements. And for that reason, issues or problems may not surface until the end. Design documentation availability, often that doesn't materialize to the end, if at all. Is the team's specifications to the vendor, were they accurate? How does this integrate with the rest of the project? In a lot of cases, the package details and safety can be an afterthought. A lot of packages are designed and fabricated in other countries where the fabrication process is more of an art, and so there may be less design documentation associated with it. So there may be a considerable gap between what the engineering team that's integrating the project and the package vendor were thinking. Was there a design review? A lot of the package vendors have a pretty standard design. They may make some minor changes. Have they really taken management of change seriously? If they make changes on their end, has anybody really thought through what the potential impact is on their vendor package or on the whole part of the design? Vendor packages are also often evaluated by the engineering designer integrator after there's a no more changes edict. At some point, management gets tired of seeing changes to schedule, seeing changes to cost, and they say, no more changes. We're going to build and fabricate and get this plant operating. So at that stage is when a lot of the vendor package details come in. So in a lot of cases, evaluations are often performed after it's too late to make changes. So what's the solution? The solution is to either do it right and do a good job with integrating the vendor package with the rest of the HAZOP and LOPA, do it early enough with time to make changes, or if you're not going to do that, if you're going to wait till the last minute after no more changes edict, why waste your team's time even evaluating it? So either decide, management has to decide, either don't do the HAZOP and LOPA on vendor packages, or do it right. Do it early enough to affect changes and make sure it's integrated with the rest of the HAZOP and LOPA. I mentioned before, design information can be quite a challenge with vendor packages too. There's usually a package engineer who's in charge of interfacing with the vendor. They're usually focused on equipment and delivery schedules, going out for low bid to get the package installed as inexpensively as possible. They need to aggressively pursue needed design information. In a lot of cases, they are busy with other tasks, and they don't pursue that design information that's either used for the HAZOP and LOPA during the design process or is necessary as part of the turnover package to the facility operator. Also, even if they get design information, they need to carefully review it for quality and completeness, that it's complete, accurate, and meets the package specifications. In a lot of cases, that need is not clear. That information that the package engineer needs to really assess that may not be available. All the more reason why you want to integrate vendor packages into your design HAZOP and LOPA. If you're applying LOPA, we'll talk about LOPA applications in a few minutes. All the more reason why that's important and why the package engineer needs to be part of the team, needs to make sure they get this information from the vendor. Also, with respect to vendor support, in a lot of cases, when I see vendors coming to a design HAZOP or LOPA, I see basically a sales engineer. They may be very familiar with the overall package specs, delivery requirements, overall capacities, etc., but they may not know the nuances of the design, and they may not be able to speak very carefully to what happens with the dynamics of the package if there is an upset, something breaks, or malfunctions. Also, complacency is a big problem when you're dealing with vendor packages. In a lot of cases, I get, oh, gee, we've designed hundreds of these packages. Well, that may be true, and it's good that they're doing that, but are they really monitoring how those packages perform in the field? They may be sent to hundreds of different facilities, and at the facilities, the facility engineers and also the operators are usually really good at fixing or retrofitting problems. So those always get fed back to the vendor so that they know their package is designed optimally. So what happens here is because of the design information is at the last minute, a lot of the evaluations are done at the last minute. There's usually large numbers of recommendations on the vendor package after the design is frozen and budgets depleted. So this goes back to the importance of making a decision. Are you even going to evaluate it? And if you are, do it right. So solutions. The squeaky wheel gets greased. The package engineer has to be the one fighting to get the information, and the overall process engineers have to be fighting to get this evaluated as part of a holistic evaluation of your process unit. Forcing issues to the table sooner is very important, and you want to avoid the large number of recommendation tracking for design issues that really should have been picked up during a design review. We're going to talk about recommendations and having too many of them in a few minutes. So let's talk about general application tips. A lot of these are applicable for all HAZOP studies. Some are very specialized to design HAZOP, and I'm going to try to differentiate those a little bit. All right, so let's talk about preparation. To get ready for a design HAZOP and LOPA, you want to make sure that you organize the overall HAZOP and LOPA for easy updates. Recognize that no design is done, final, and 100% final. Wonderful, go out and build it. There's always cycles. So anticipating the fact that you're going to be updating the HAZOP and LOPA is important. Organizing it with respect to proper noting, how you organize the causes, having a systematic approach, very, very important. Also for preparation, pre-populating the causes. Not everybody endorses this concept, but we found is that by the facilitator sitting down with the engineering drawings ahead of time, listing out the causes in a organized, systematic fashion, and prepping it ahead of time, it makes very efficient use of the team time so that they don't have to think about the real simple things that you can pick up easily from an engineering drawing, and they can focus on some of the more challenging items. So by pre-populating, it helps completeness of the HAZOP and LOPA. Make sure you pick up a lot of the key scenarios, and it allows the team to brainstorm for some of the more complex issues after the basics are done. The structure for the HAZOP and LOPA is clear, it's organized, you can find things a lot easier, so that when you go through and update it as your design changes, it's a lot easier. Also, what I get a lot of times from the design teams, when you ask questions, what happens if this valve closes? What happens if this pump doesn't operate? They scratch their heads, and you know what? They really haven't thought about it. They're focused more in terms of optimizing the design, the economics of the design, equipment sizing, how to make it work. The beauty of the HAZOP and LOPA, and one of the key reasons why you want to infuse it into the design, is because you're looking at how things don't work. What are the system dynamics? What happens when something doesn't work properly? It's looking at things from a very different perspective than what's classically done for the design process. This helps you find weaknesses that may not have been apparent before. Now, that means the design team may not have thought about them, which is why you're doing the HAZOP and LOPA. But if you're pre-populating causes, you can send them to the team ahead of time. You can tell the team, hey, let's work through this HAZOP and LOPA as efficiently as possible. Go ahead and be prepared to answer questions and tell us what the process dynamics are so that we can quickly home in on are there weaknesses after developing the scenarios. Okay, maintaining a consistent and disciplined approach. The structure approach, applying the same kind of scenarios in different portions of the process, very important for being able to use it later, and also making sure that you do a thorough and complete job for the HAZOP and LOPA. Clear and sensible node boundaries. Having something where you're not repeating the same kind of scenarios over and over and over again is important, and also making sure you do it right. I picked up an effort in the middle of a design where another facilitator had been a little sloppy with their organization, and there were in many cases no less than 4 different variations of the same scenario with different answers. As you looked at from one node to another node, flow variations to pressure variations to temperature variations, well, they got different answers. They didn't do a thorough job on one, call it a day, so they spent more effort to do an incomplete and poor job. Having an organized and consistent approach, good preparation for the HAZOP and LOPA, very, very important. Other things that we do to prepare is we create a quick reference. It's basically a handout with risk ranking details, not just the risk ranking chart that you put on a wall. It's in front of them. They can review it. They can look at risk ranking matrix. They can look at the definitions of the consequences, the likelihood rankings, and also some examples for various consequence types. Putting representative consequences in there allows people to kind of be consistent from one scenario, from one portion of the process to another, and make sure that you get good results. Also, if you're applying LOPA, you can put in the initiating cause likelihoods, independent protection layer probabilities, and also any conditional modifiers that you want. And since we're talking about LOPA, let's mention that really quickly. What's the right type of LOPA application? Well, the real answer is it depends. The reality is we typically recommend selective application of LOPA as you're developing the HAZOP scenarios. This provides, if it's important enough from a consequence or risk perspective, LOPA can provide insights. Perhaps you're overestimating the risk. In many cases, LOPA also, because it's quantitative, allows you to put in the conditional probabilities of failure on independent protection layers, and it can, in many cases, identify that safety instrumented systems are applied when it's really not necessary. So, selective application of LOPA is typically what we endorse, and if you do it during the HAZOP, it provides a lot of insights and also does not have to add too much to the time or effort of your overall team sessions. Also, facilitators' understanding of process technology. As part of preparation efforts, there's a certain school of thought, I think it's a little bit more old school, where the facilitator doesn't need to know anything about the process. All they need to do is understand how to HAZOP and ask questions. Well, there's some merit to that. The independence is good. The not being part of the design team is good. But the reality is, if the facilitator has spent time preparing, understanding the process, they can help guide the team better. If you're trying to drive a car down the road and you're blindfolded, you're going to have problems. If you're trained on how to drive the car, if you can see what you're doing, you can drive a little bit straighter and get to your destination a little bit more safely. It's the same way for HAZOP and LOPA facilitation. If the facilitator prepares, understands the process, then they can make sure that they move the team as expediently as possible to do a very thorough job. Also, by understanding the process pretty thoroughly, I like to prep pretty well before I facilitate a HAZOP study, they can neutralize tangential conversations. Every team member brings some of their own agenda to the HAZOP and LOPA sessions. It's easy for people to get distracted. They've got pet issues. They may have different perspectives, which is, in some cases, those different perspectives are valuable. But if you let people get off track too much, it just bogs down the effort and you're defocused from your important mission, which is to identify potential weaknesses in the design. So, understanding the process allows you to identify and neutralize tangential conversations a lot easier. Again, preparation is very important. So let's talk about some of the team sessions. Avoid repeating scenarios. Some people think maybe it's a great idea to talk about the same thing twice. Wrong. Talk about it once, do a thorough job, document it well, and then the next time it comes up, if somebody is saying, no, this is different, listen to them. Maybe there's something that you did wrong the first time or there's some additional insights. That's great. But go back and correct the scenario rather than making another one that maybe instead of one complete assessment where you understand what's going on and can make the right decisions, you've got two incomplete assessments where you really don't have good conclusions. Process and instrumentation support. That's not just a drawing. It's not just the instrumentation engineer coming to the session with a blank sheet of paper. They need to be prepared. Modern designs incorporate significant digital control systems, safety instrumented systems, how are the process computers set up, independence of the logic units. All those things are key parts of instrumentation and control and protection systems, part of a modern facility. Your instrumentation engineer needs to be very well prepared with at least a general idea of set points, what the functions of your control and protection measures are, and especially safety instrumented systems, what's their recommended pedigree going in. The HAZOP and LOPA is supposed to be assessing the design. It's not supposed to be providing a framework for somebody to run off and then do a design and control and protection system, which then doesn't get evaluated because management thinks that they already did a HAZOP and LOPA, why do it again? Well, who's checking whether the logic for the control and protection functions actually fits in properly? So during the design phase, a lot of the big expense is focused because, again, for design issues, management focuses on the big expense items, which are typically process equipment, large vessels, and other big components. And a lot of times instrumentation takes a back seat. That's not appropriate. For the HAZOP and LOPA, it's all about the scenario. How does the protection systems respond to upset conditions, and are they adequate? So instrumentation folks need to come in prepared. Drawings, instrumentation drawings, the functions need to be apparent from the PNIDs or from cause and effect diagrams, and this is critical towards a proper HAZOP and LOPA assessment. This is another controversial item. Facilitators, in many cases, the old school was, okay, ask a question, have the scribe write down the answer. Well, in a lot of cases, if the facilitator is properly prepared, they can help the team reach a conclusion. They don't have to make the conclusion for the team, but a lot of times teams flounder with not even knowing how to begin answering a question. I'll often ask the question, pose the scenario, and if the team is struggling for a couple of minutes, I'll say, hey, I think you were going to tell me this was going to happen, or I think you might be telling me that this safeguard might be helpful in this situation. There's nothing wrong with providing either some suggestions for a well-trained facilitator who's very well prepared, or maybe even provide a multiple choice question. Hey, I think your answers might be either A or B or C. What do you guys think? And let them help them focus on characterizing their answers. Quickly identifying uncertainties, whether it be incomplete information, whether we don't know if something is providing the appropriate degree of protection. That's also something that you want to identify happen during session. Focusing on the ultimate consequence. Some teams, a daily briefing and reminder that you're looking at the ultimate consequences is adequate. Some teams, I almost have to remind every 45 minutes that to characterize the scenario properly and identify if the safeguards are adequate or whatever the existing protection features are, you need to identify how bad can it get, and then you can assess whether your safeguards are adequate or not. Human nature means that you typically think of the protection features first because those are always on your mind, and a lot of times the team wants to say, because it's human nature, oh, that can happen, and then you ask why, and it's, oh, we got the safeguard. Well, you need to characterize the ultimate consequence to develop the scenario to get the conclusions that you want to get out of the HAZOP and LOPA. I usually use a 5-minute rule. If they can't figure out the process dynamics in 5 minutes in terms of what's happening with the system, they're not prepared to answer the question. Now, maybe it's an unusual question. Maybe they hadn't considered that kind of scenario. That's fair. But they don't have to struggle with it or solve those kind of problems during the HAZOP or LOPA. After a few minutes, give them a homework assignment. Cut it at that point and say, look, why don't you guys figure this out? We'll come back to the scenario tomorrow. Figure out the ultimate consequence. Figure out recommendations. A lot of times people have great ideas. Well, that's great. Usually 9 times out of 10, the solution is pretty obvious. It's basically an application of best practices that they hadn't thought of yet. Well, that makes a good recommendation. It converges very easily. However, that's not always the case. If they can't figure out what the solution is in 5 minutes, the objective of the HAZOP and LOPA isn't to find the solutions, but it's to identify the problems. So, 5-minute rule. If they can't do it in 5 minutes, you got to stop. It's okay to skip and return and come back to that scenario. Now, I do provide a lot of latitude to design teams because, as I mentioned, you got the same resources in the room as you do for the design effort, design review. If they're being very productive, I'll give them some latitude towards finding a solution if it looks like they're converging. If the facilitator is prepared enough to understand the process, to know that they're converging, you can give them some rope. But if you're not prepared, or if it doesn't look like they're converging, cut it, give them a homework assignment, come back for it. So many times during the design process, oh, this is a simple design. We know how to do these. And they run to the whiteboard and sketch out, this is what we're going to do. Well, that hasn't been thought out very well. And 9 times out of 10, when I see that happening, even if I give them a few minutes because they're so confident that they know how that design is and that they've converged on it, even if I give them a few minutes on that, it falls apart. They hadn't thought it through. It doesn't work. And basically, you just end up getting an eraser to the whiteboard and giving an assignment for people to get something done. Don't hesitate to give people assignments using a flip chart or some electronic notepad. Anything that doesn't require team effort, and if it takes time during the session, assign it and move on. It's all about effectively identifying potential weaknesses in the design. If you go in circles and never converge on things, that's not very effective. If something needs to be implemented outside the HAZOP and LOPA, give them an assignment. Parking lots that are terrific, but parking lots, I usually give it with the caveat that anything that's not resolved by the end of the team sessions is transitioned into a HAZOP or LOPA recommendation. This gives people a lot of incentive towards working a little bit on their own time after session to close things out so that they're actually done and they don't walk away with an action assignment that requires five signatures to get it closed out. And also, if somebody's been very cooperative and getting their actions done, that can be recognized during the HAZOP and LOPA as part of the HAZOP and LOPA documentation. Okay, key thing is maintaining session momentum. Keep the team engaged. If they're not interested, if you're not moving fast enough to get things done, and where they see progress, they tune out. They've got laptop computers with them. They've got cell phones with them. They're very busy people typically. Those are the people that you want at the team. People who get things done. People who get things done are usually very busy. If you don't move quickly and focus on things, you're going to lose them. Keep their interest level. Keep them engaged in the HAZOP and LOPA activity. Make it interesting for them, and also move quickly enough so that they have to pay attention. You also want to make sure they're motivated. If somebody's there just to enjoy the coffee and snacks, get rid of them. Okay, they have to be motivated to want to do a good job. It's all about maintaining session momentum, which leads to good quality work. You want to basically have a lot of respect for team time. That's a fundamental importance for any HAZOP and LOPA facilitation. It's especially true during the design effort. Start on time. If somebody's late, that's their bad. They can walk away with action items. If they're really essential, then you call their manager and get a substitute in the room. If necessary, do not hesitate at the end of the 5 or 10 minute break to go out, find the people, drag them back to the conference room. If there are extraneous personnel, people who don't really have a lot to contribute, if they don't need to be there, get rid of them. They're often are the ones that instigate tangential conversations that aren't conducive to getting the job done. You can provide a little bit of latitude with that, but for somebody who only has to make provide a contribution maybe 1% of the time, let them get to work. Call them in on for a focused discussion when need be. If you need to get these subject matter experts in the room, make sure the objectives are clear. I've had a couple of cases where I didn't flesh it out properly. They call the subject matter expert in there. We have a 45-minute discussion that I thought was going to lead to a conclusion, and it turns out that the person who called the subject matter expert in just wanted them to be briefed on the situation. Well, hey, they could have read our HAZOP worksheets. They did not need to waste 45 minutes of team time to get briefed on the situation. So make sure the objectives are clear and make sure it's conducive to getting things done. I always keep a notepad in my hand, and I write notes down. There's a lot of things that I'm thinking about while I'm listening to people discussing or answering questions on the HAZOP scenarios. I don't need to interject every 10 seconds. If I can write it down, let them reach a conclusion, then you go to hit them with it. It's a lot more efficient to getting things done. Keep engineering drawings in hand. I'm usually walking around with my engineering drawings so I can study what's going on and trying to think a couple of steps ahead. Part of being a facilitator is like playing chess. You're strategically moving your pieces so that you can corner your opponent, and in the game of chess, you'll checkmate them. Well, for facilitating a HAZOP study, you want to be able to lead your team down the path of reaching conclusions and reaching the right conclusion. So being able to think ahead and strategize on doing that is very important. Also, I tend to, you got to find a balance for this, but I tend to endorse more focusing the team on their progress. Documentation polishing can be done later. With respect to documentation and scribing, there's always this balance of how much extra does a scribe cost versus how much does the teams, is the savings in team time if you can finish sooner because you've got a scribe doing the work. That's going to be different for every project. General rule of thumb is if you've got more than 4 or 5 very expensive people sitting in a room doing these HAZOP and LOPA sessions, a good scribe will more than pay for themselves. But every project's different, and you got to balance that extra cost of scribe involvement. Also for conducting the session, prolific use of tag numbers. This is not, if you've looked at our auditing modules and quality modules, we've emphasized that a lot. That also makes sense during sessions. I don't know how many times as a facilitator I'm listening to a conversation, and because I prepared properly, I hear one side of the table talking to the other side of the table, and they're talking about different things. And I can sense that because I'm familiar with it and I'm listening very carefully to the discussion, whereas they may not be even listening carefully to each other. All right? Neutralizing that can be very effectively done if you use very specific equipment names, very specific tag numbers as you're rolling out these scenarios. It helps people do a good job. It helps people stay focused so you can get the job done faster. I also do a daily briefing to align the team in terms of what they're doing and what their objectives are. And I move around a lot. I'll point to drawings, the drawings on the wall, on the projected image on the screen. All those things I'll do to engage them. Keep them awake, keep them focused on what's being done. I don't need to jump out of my chair or walk around and point to drawings on the wall for my benefit. It's a matter of keeping the team focused so you can do good quality work in the time that's available to you. Focusing on the objectives is important. Your objectives is probably safety and operability with an emphasis on safety typically, especially if it's during the design. Capacity issues and a lot of these ancillary tangential issues can be addressed outside the HAZOP and LOPA. Don't hesitate to make an assignment to the 2 people in the room of 10 who really have to resolve this kind of issue. As appropriate, a good facilitator, if you prepared and understand the process, can create boundary conditions. You don't need to know the pressure to 5 decimal places typically. Often you need to know, is there time for the alarms to engage and the operator to respond to the alarms and actually have the process safety impact? Is there time for the safety instrumented system to respond? And you often don't need that degree of detail. You just need to know that it's below a certain value or above a certain value. So a good facilitator can set boundary conditions to help the team make decisions. We talked about concurrent HAZOP and LOPA. If it's done properly, the LOPA can be done with a minimal increment of time, and that time is very well spent. And in a lot of cases, it provides some insights to the HAZOP scenario that you wouldn't have seen otherwise. We talked about tangential conversations. Again, a lot of times it's so tempting to just jump in there, pound on the table, say, stop talking about that, let's go back to our HAZOP study. But you know that doesn't work a lot. What the people who were having that conversation, they thought it was an important conversation, and they thought it was helpful to the HAZOP, or they wouldn't have been doing that. So basically, the facilitator's job, if you really want to truncate that and get back on track, what you want to do is encapsulate that, put it in the context of a HAZOP and LOPA, and push them into concluding that, hey, this can be solved outside the HAZOP and LOPA. Basically, another thing that really bogs down a design HAZOP is there's a lot of ideas that aren't strictly incredibly high consequence or incredibly high risk. There are things that were missed during the design. There are confirmatory calculations. There are value-added changes. There are things that need additional background information is needed. There needs to be some mechanism for resolving that. If you drive a team to only having track HAZOP or LOPA recommendations, and this is true also for operating facilities, you basically mean that you're gonna doom the team spending a lot of time trying to fit their ideas into the framework of a HAZOP recommendation, or they're going to be frustrated because a lot of things they know need to be done. There's no mechanism to resolve it. All this boils down to additional time taken that's not conducive to doing a good job. Identifying clear expectations. I usually tell the process engineer that if they walk into my HAZOP and LOPA and they can't identify the dynamic response to a system within 30 seconds of when I ask, hey, what happens if this valve closes or what happens if this pump stops, they're really not prepared. And they really need to look at their system. They need to study that the predefined cause list to make sure that they're prepared properly. Same thing for instrumentation. If they don't know what their instruments do when you hit that high pressure set point, they haven't done their job. They need to come in with engaged to do a good job for the team. Again, key principles for the team members is people have to be engaged. They need to watch the details. As a facilitator, I can spot a lot of things from P&ID on a P&ID from miles away, but I'm not the one to be doing that. It's their job to design it. They should have done a good job in the first place. Now, I don't mind contributing, but they're the ones who I should be just asking questions, and they should have good, correct, clear, and responsive answers. Team members also need to be thinking critically of their own design and not be complacent that, oh, this is how we did it before. Oh, we borrowed this design for refinery B from refinery A, and refinery A didn't complain, so it must be fine. So those are a lot of things that you can do during the session conduct. What I also would encourage is updating master copies of the drawings. If you see little problems, just fix them. Things like missing tag numbers, drawing corrections, piping specs, a lot of things that are just obvious as part of best practice, or just oops, things that were missed during the design. Just fix them on the spot and move on, and then the copies of the master drawings can be included as an appendix for the HAZOP study, so there's a clear continuity of the record. The other thing that I want to talk about is additional analysis. First of all, avoid over-analysis. It's really easy to get dragged through the weeds during a HAZOP or LOPA. There are a lot of tools out there. There's a lot of other techniques, fault tree analysis, other approaches for risk ranking, bow tie analysis, event tree analysis, control system HAZOP studies. A lot of these things are available to you to help clarify the problem. In many cases, I'll use some quantitative numbers, usually from LOPA tables for IPLs or ICLs, to help the team clarify what their discussions. This is good. You want to go ahead and, as a facilitator, be knowledgeable of these other techniques, especially some of the quantitative assessments, to bring it into play to shed light on what the team is discussing. But don't overanalyze. You probably don't need to do, for example, a LOPA or a fault tree or a quantitative assessment on all scenarios. All right? Focus your efforts on the important areas. Make sure that the energies of the team are focused on that. So use these other techniques to put risks into perspective and focus the team, but don't let it get bogged down. Okay, so another key thing I want to talk about is I mentioned don't define a node boundary in the middle of a flow segment. Design segregation issues are of heightened concern during a design HAZOP study. All right, you've got the engineering contractor works on this piece and the piece afterwards, and in the middle there's a vendor package or piping. All right, it's one flow path. All right, so when you're analyzing this, you look at the unit coming in or the system coming in, the system coming out, and the piping in between, and you're all looking at no flow cases, well, gosh, you're not only tripling your work, but you may be getting different answers. So during a segregated engineering project, where it's the organizational structure involves different teams, different companies maybe, it can lead to these design segregation challenges. And also, you've got concerns because different facilitators on a large project, different schedules of when these things are evaluated, and different teams may be evaluating this too. The whole concept of a HAZOP and LOPA is a holistic approach for looking at your design and how you're operating it to find potential vulnerabilities. If you take, as in this diagram, and go from one company to another company, and you're looking at the upstream of the valve in March and downstream of the valve in June, and you got different teams and different companies, you're going to get different answers, and chances are neither one of them are going to be correct because you haven't taken a holistic approach. So the timing of when these things are done, getting the right people on board, all that's a key part of doing a good job for HAZOP and LOPA during the design process. When we're allowed to come in at the beginning and help segment the system or node the system, we'll go ahead and accommodate for where those vendor packages are going to be, and we're going to help the design team identify the timing of when those are evaluated to make sure it's done on a holistic basis. And again, in all these cases, the sooner you, a good facilitator can also deal with preliminary information. So you can do a fairly light effort, look at a lot of key scenarios early in the design. Then as the design matures, back to that design cycle that we looked at before, you can go ahead and infuse and update the HAZOP and LOPA if you've designed the HAZOP and LOPA for easy updates. All these things come together in terms of doing a good job with HAZOP and LOPA for a big design project. So it never goes well, or at least 100%. So why do you have a bunch of action items? This is a question management is going to be asking at the end of most design projects. Why do we have all these action items? Why didn't this get done early on? It's important to understand the dynamics of the design process and why these things happen so you can head them off at the pass and not have as many problems. So why do you have so many action items? Well, did the process engineer do a really thoughtful design effort? Did they think of all the angles? Did they anticipate where their design's going? Hey, a lot of times everybody does this. They get to a certain stage of their project and management says, I want a status update. Well, they say, hey boss, everything's going great. Everything's done. I'm ready to turn it over. Well, no. Okay, in many cases, it's not really true. They may have addressed some of the bigger issues, but a lot of the details didn't get done yet. And so a lot of those things still need to get done. Package engineers, vendors, we already talked about that. All those folks, in a lot of cases, had to say, oh, we've reached a certain stage of completion without maybe thinking through all the angles or really being as complete as it should have been. So if you didn't do that complete job up front, then you're basically kicking the can down the road and defaulting the design review and all the details to your design HAZOP and LOPA. Well, that's actually good if you know it's happening that way. But if management doesn't have that perspective and all of a sudden during the design HAZOP and LOPA, you're surfacing a lot of these issues that should have been brought up months or years ago, then you're basically got a lot of people with egg on their faces and a lot of people surprised who don't like to get surprised. And you've got to be able to accommodate that in some manner. Especially if you schedule the design HAZOP and LOPA as they always often are done, instead of cyclic during the design phase, but at the end of the project, then a lot of these cans that get kicked down the road are going to surface at that time after a design freeze and after you've expended your budgets. And so at that point, you've got a lot of things to fix with no time and no money left. You want to avoid that if at all possible. So how do you avoid that? Well, start early. Bring this design cycle that includes your HAZOP and LOPA as early as practical when you got some information. Again, if you've got preliminary information, if you design your HAZOP and LOPA to be updated easily, you can go ahead and hit the key scenarios early on and then update it and add more detail as details become available. But the beauty of that is you work out critical things like vessel design pressures, things that are almost impossible to change later. You bring these to the surface early. I had one case where I was working on a project and they found out at the very end of the project that the vessel design pressure was about 2/3 of what it should have been. And what that meant is a whole cycle of trying to look at some advanced safety instrumented systems that were very difficult to apply at that time. So you want to bin the actions by priority. As I mentioned, confirmatory calculations, design background information, and discretionary work can be done outside of that to make sure your HAZOP and LOPA recommendations are focused on the key stuff. And try to minimize it by bringing in HAZOP and LOPA early in the process. So let's talk about some quality issues. A while back, somebody asked me to encapsulate what are the key things that we need to check if we're reviewing a HAZOP or LOPA study? And can you put it in one page? Well, of course not. But here's my list of things that you definitely want to look for if you're reviewing a HAZOP or LOPA for a lot of the key quality issues. First of all, a completeness check. You don't just read a HAZOP report. You look at the drawings, you look at the HAZOP. Do they pick up all the key scenarios? Are the ultimate consequences consistently identified? And did they use it for risk ranking? Sometimes when I pick up work that's been done, if I'm a team member in a large design process, work that's been done by another company, basically I'll see a lot of discontinuities with respect to identifying the ultimate consequences for the same type of event, and then the risk ranking is not consistent even if they got the consequences correctly. Well, that can lead to poor answers. Now, hopefully in a lot of cases you're not going to do something that will result in loss of life or significant damage to the facility, but that can happen. So make sure you check if you're reviewing a HAZOP or LOPA that they've identified the ultimate consequences consistently and risk ranked consistently. Safeguards, are they complete? Are they clearly a barrier independently between the causal event and the ultimate consequences? Also, are safeguards independent? Did they just list out a bunch of stuff, or are they independent from the causal event so there's no common mode failures, either between the independent protection layer and the causal event, or between multiple independent protection layers? Can you understand the scenarios? When you review a HAZOP worksheet, mentally you should be able to picture what's happening, fires, explosions, or whatever, and the progression of the events. And if you can't interpret that from the way the scenario is written, there's a quality problem. Somebody needs to fix up their HAZOP and LOPA study. Risk ranking consistency. Recommendations. Can you understand what the team is actually recommending? Are they self-standing? Are they properly interpretable? And is the HAZOP and LOPA structured for future use? A lot of times, especially if you're looking at the design process, they're going like, what? We're trying to get done with our design, implement it, turn over the documents to the owner-operator. Well, the owner-operator needs to keep these. Most owner-operators, if they're subject to regulations in like the United Kingdom with safety cases, or in the United States with process safety management, risk management programs, have to update these HAZOP and LOPA activities periodically, and also apply them possibly for management of change. So you want to structure this from the beginning to be able to be used so you can find things very easily. That's a key part of HAZOP and LOPA documentation quality. So now, if you want a short list of some of the key things to look for on one slide, this is it. That's the best I can do. If you really do need to review these things thoroughly, there's lots and lots of details that you should be looking at if you look at a HAZOP and LOPA study. Also, a key thing to know in terms of quality as a facilitator is knowing when to stop. Beating a dead horse can happen during the HAZOP and LOPA. You want to make sure that you, as a facilitator, you keep focused on the objectives, that you're providing value, that you're identifying potential weaknesses or vulnerabilities, and focus on the quality of the results and how they're going to be used. How do you handle incomplete information? We want to make sure that you are focused on providing value for design decision making. Sometimes information doesn't need to be complete, and you still can reach the right conclusion, and you get sufficient information for decision making. The trick is knowing when to stop and knowing when you don't have enough information. Another key thing is management of change. If you go ahead and pull the trigger on design freeze too early, you're condemning the project to large numbers of management change items that need to be tracked. This is very time intensive and can really bog down the project schedule. Okay, so I want to close with the overall concept of what you're doing with the design HAZOP and LOPA. You're trying to maintain project budgets, project schedule, and have a safer and more operable facility. The HAZOP and LOPA, as part of this overall design effort, with the facilitation tips that I've provided and the other issues on how to deal with them that come up during the design, can help achieve that objective. It can provide a different perspective. As I mentioned, you're looking at things on how they break a lot differently than the designer might look at how they work. You're going to force completion of the efforts. as I mentioned before, it's really easy to walk into the boss's office and say, hey, I'm done. Did a great job. I'm going to go have my dessert now and a long lunch. All right? Well, the reality is by having a DHAZOP and LOPA, it forces issues to the table early and forces people to be complete because they're going to be judged by their peers. Forces resolution of information bottlenecks, drives the anticipation of design deficiencies. If you've got design deficiencies for unforeseen hazards, these can come up early. And also, it neutralizes the I'm waiting for syndrome. It's really easy for somebody to say, well, gee, I would have designed that, but I was waiting for somebody else to get the job done. Well, the design HAZOP and LOPA makes everybody come to the table to get things done. So you can maintain project schedules, help maintain project budget, and also it's really a good teamwork exercise to put issues in perspective and provide a forum for resolving design disputes, resolving design deficiencies, finding vulnerabilities, finding weaknesses, and getting them resolved while your facility is on the drawing board rather than trying to retrofit it after it's in operation. So, I know that's a lot. What I've tried to do is encapsulate some of the key tips that will help you get through your design HAZOP and LOPA a little bit easier, how to handle certain things, and also for those of you who haven't done it, a lot of things that can come up during the design phase that can be resolved with the proper application of these techniques with a facilitator who's well prepared. So I'll open it up for questions in a couple of minutes. While you guys are thinking of questions, what I'd like to do is let you know what's coming up. We do have a webinar that's coming up on June 28th. There have been a lot of things that have changed in the regulatory environment at the federal level for risk management programs. This is for the United States. Also at the United States federal level, for OSHA has come up with several interpretation letters that impact how people do things at the plant site. And also in California, there are a number of changes to what's called CALARP, California Accident Release Prevention Program, and also process safety management at the state level. And a lot of these things, do impact process hazard analysis and how you're doing that. Key part of those changes are what's called safeguard protection analysis. That's basically LOPA as one means of verifying that the safeguards provide the protection as they're designed for. That's coming up on July 12th. We're going to be doing a webinar that reviews the CCPS guidelines for initiating events and IPLs in LOPA. And it's actually part 2 of Module 13. Putting this all in perspective, we just completed right now Module 14 of our HAZOP and LOPA facilitation series. Module 13, first part was done about a month and a half ago. July 12th will be the second part. Okay, so for all that said, I'll take questions. Basically, Kevin Singh is our producer, and he's been monitoring the chat window. You're also welcome to call in. You're also welcome to request to be unmuted if you want to have something to add to the discussion, or contesting how I do things is also a fair game too.
Okay, the first question from the audience is it acceptable to combine multiple related causes into a single scenario?
Okay, the answer is maybe. When you're putting causes together from a process dynamics perspective, if you close a manual valve, or if the flow control, if a control valve closes, or if a transmitter fails to cause the control valve to close, in all cases you may have a no-flow case for that line segment. Now, so the consequences are going to be the same, but the safeguards, the protection features, and also the probabilities may be quite different. So, to the extent practical, if it's a typical control valve station where valves are the block valves are readily identifiable, perhaps the probability of leaving those valves closed is overreached by the failure probability of the control valve to close or a transmitter to fail to cause the control valve to close. In a case like that, perhaps you can lump them together, but that has to be done with an understanding of how it relates for potential common mode failures to your safeguards. For example, not only you have to be considerate of the probability or the initiating cause likelihood of the causal event, But if it's a transmitter that fails to cause the valve to close, and that transmitter is a key part of making a safeguard work, then you have to be careful not to have a common cause failure or a common mode failure between the causal event and the safeguard. So, as appropriate, if you're doing it with full knowledge of looking for common mode failures and what the overriding failure probabilities are, you can put them together, but you have to do that very carefully.
Okay, the next question from the audience is, in your opinion, what is the single most important tip for effective HAZOP LOPA facilitation?
Okay, so we went through a lot of items. I tried to summarize tips for things to do during sessions, things to do beforehand. In terms of the single most important thing, if I had to pin down one item, it's really part of preparation. Just like many things in life, good preparation makes the end result come out a lot better. Having the facilitator preload the causes into worksheets provides so many opportunities for the facilitator to get up to speed on the process design itself, or providing that list of causes to the team members so they can get up to speed. It provides structure for the HAZOP and LOPA so it can be updated easily and it's more useful. And by providing that structure, you're less likely to repeat scenarios, which if you do it right is just a drain on team time. And if you don't do it right, it's a mess later to try for somebody to look through it and sort out which is the correct way, which is the correct answer if you're doing the same thing multiple times. So that one activity, more than a lot of things, can be conducive to quality and streamlining team time and really make sure the facilitator is prepared enough to properly guide the team. So that would be my one item. Kevin, next.
The next question we have. Some HAZOP studies involve remote personnel attendance. What guidance would you provide for effective implementation?
Okay, things have changed a lot in many respects for how HAZOP and LOPA studies are done. The classic get everybody into a room is still the most effective way to do things. However, because of these different packages and parts of the design are often done in different parts of the world, and the design team may be in different parts of the world too, and with the advancements and ease of applying techniques like what we're using right now with our GoToWebinar, it's really easy to right now share computer screens, have video cameras and audio that goes across the world and connects different teams together. So the technology's there, the need is there, but there are some nuances to that. I've done that on quite a few occasions, and there are some nuances to making that work, and that is something that we're going to have another webinar on in the future as part of our HAZOP and LOPA facilitation series in terms of effectively doing these remote sessions. There are quite a few tricks to it, and there are some key things that you really need to keep in mind to make sure that it works and it works effectively. Oh, that's it? Okay, well, I guess that's it for questions. And I wanted to thank you. I hope that you guys walked away with an understanding of the importance of applying HAZOP and LOPA during the design process, and also with some solid tips on how to control it to maximize the quality and efficiency of the outcome. And appreciate your attendance. If you do have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to call, and we'll look forward to your attendance on the next webinar segment. Good day to you.